Welcome, everyone, to the Basic Income Show. My name is Scott Santons, and I'm here with my co hosts, Josh Worth and Conrad Shaw. And yeah, we've got a lot to talk about it always. We always talk about the latest developments in basic income. And of course, there's some other recent happenings to talk about as well. So let's get to it. As always, I like to change up the theme song each time with the same lyrics, but a different version. So yeah, here's this week's.
This intro music is AI generated. Love it or hate it, no one was compensated. One more artist wonders where their money will come from. One more example of the need for basic income.
Yeah, that
Very
was a fun
happy.
one, right?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, what do you all want to talk about this week? Anything
Oh,
happen of
what's
Not
going on
much
in the
happened
yeah.
really.
world?
It's kind of same old, same old.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I was just thinking earlier, like it was a couple of weeks ago where the big news was Hurricane Helene and everyone getting left behind and um, or just sort of underwater. I always, every time that happens, I think about like how important it would be to have some sort of help that lasts beyond the 12-second news cycle. But is anyone even talking about it now? I mean, I'm pretty sure North Carolina is still pretty ravaged, and Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was just another quick reminder before we dive into the obvious subject of the day that we need systems change, not just, following the news cycle outrage porn like activism.
Yeah.
Yeah, however you feel about the results of this election, I think those who are unhappy with it, it's a good opportunity to reflect on what happened and going forward what to do. We clearly have to talk about this first off the bat, like what lessons are we taking, and what do we think about going forward as far as things to focus on, ways to adapt, ways to respond. I don't know. I mean, I've got my thoughts.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
sure
We
you
were
both have your
talking.
thoughts.
We were talking with our development team for Commingle, and I was remembering like the Commingle came out of a Trump era response to sort of a feeling that, well, if the government's not going to help us sort of take care of ourselves or each other, then maybe we should come up with our own solutions. So it's, I think, what we're working on is right at home in this kind of environment. And so, if that's reassuring to anybody, I hope it is, because the work continues and still feeling good about it. I'm not feeling as though like the current climate has, or whatever, not quite the current climate, the upcoming climate is having an effect on, like, if anything, it kind of bodes well for people that feeling a need to have some kind of way of, working together that isn't part of a government system, since our government systems are starting to seem pretty
Yeah, I think that's sort of a universal feeling too, is people are fed up with the government, which is why the sort of more populist, I guess, or populist seeming or demagogish or whatever, that sort of rhetoric is appealing to more people, and people are just exhausted by the sort of status quo, everything's going great. Like, really? Because that's not what I'm seeing, you know, where I am. Um, is what a lot of people think. It seems like people are ready for some sort of change, even if the only real change offered is like of the shut it down variety.
Josh, you said that you had written something
yeah. So I
in
just
in
wanted to like
response to this.
sort
I'm
of,
very curious to
okay, I
to
wanted to
hear it.
get this off of my chest, because so every morning I spend about half an hour just writing just whatever comes to mind, just kind of as a way to wake up. And so the other morning, Wednesday morning, I flipped open my computer to see that yes, indeed, my fears were confirmed. So anyway, I started writing, and usually what I write ends up like maybe on a blog or part of a script for one of our videos or something like that. Or this one was a little bit different. So here it goes. It's a little quickie story, like some flash fiction that came out. So make of it as you will. It's called Hidden Geology. All right. Did you know there's a place you can visit that's run by rocks? It's true, the rocks are in charge of everything. If you have a postcard you want to mail, you go up to a rock and ask, "Where do I go to mail a letter?" And the rock looks at you and says nothing. If you trip and fall and hit your head on a rock, you can say, "Ow, that hurt." And the rock will look at you and not care, not even if there's blood. And if you ask, "Do you know where I can find someone who can fix my head?" you get the same answer. The rocks themselves are quite interesting. You can find all sorts, the smooth ones, the rough ones, the ones with the different colored lines going across, or the ones with the sparkly flecks or the crystals inside. Some of them are very big and others are quite small. You might even go so far as to call them boulders and pebbles rather than just rocks. It's a nice place. I often visit and camp out among the rocks, some of whom I have come to know and grown to admire. One morning during a visit, I was awoken by a few rocks tumbling around next to me, making a slightly annoying clunking sound. As they tumbled, they bumped into other rocks, convincing them to roll along with them. By lunchtime, quite a few of the rocks were in motion, including some of the pebbles and boulders. They seemed to be having a good time for the most part, but the dust was bothering me, not just because it hurt my eyes and was making me sneeze, but because I knew the dust was actually just smaller rocks getting ground up by all the commotion. "What's all this ruckus?" I asked. The rocks gave no answer, as was their custom. I poured some soup from my thermos and sat down on one of my favorite rocks to wait for the activity to die down. While sitting there sipping my soup, I performed a close analysis of the situation, trying to identify the source of all this movement. Were they dancing to some sort of internal drum music? Were they preparing to stack together to build something like a castle or a pyramid, some kind of monument? I began to wonder if perhaps I was the one who started it. I have been known to sometimes kick my legs in my sleep like a dog who dreams of running. Had my kicking agitated a few nearby rocks, setting this whole thing in motion? By the afternoon, the movement of the rocks was so tumultuous that it completely knocked my sitting rock out from under me. Soon after, the rumbling rocks went so far as to crush my tent, along with all the expensive camping gear inside. "Do you even realize how important that gear is to my survival?" I asked the rocks. "Do you know how many hours I had to work to get that hand braided hammock, or how many coupons I saved to get that brass lantern?" As usual, the rocks had nothing to say for themselves. Fed up, I decided to abandon my campsite. The dust was everywhere now, making it difficult to locate the trail I usually follow to get back home, so I began to walk in the same general direction that the rocks seemed to be heading. Off in the distance, I could see the rocks ahead of me, wreaking havoc on the once peaceful countryside, knocking over trees, damming the little streams, and demolishing the meadows. By evening, I found myself in a wasteland covered by rocks of all sizes, still shaking and rumbling, to the point that I could no longer maintain my balance. With my footing out from under me, I was quickly overtaken by a particularly unruly group of moving rocks. As they banded together to cover my head and block my view of the action, I was able to take notice of one interesting thing. The rocks seemed to be moving in a more or less consistent direction from areas of higher elevation to areas of lower elevation. I'm not sure how long I was lying there, buried in the darkness, contemplating this revelation, but I was relieved when the rocks finally came to rest. "What was that all about?" I asked the rocks that were covering my face, and they answered with the same noncommittal indifference which I had once found so endearing. I began to carefully move the rocks off my body, attempting to make my way back to the surface without upsetting them, unsure of how deeply I had been buried. That's when I felt something moving above me, digging through the rubble, helping to clear a path to the surface. Soon I was able to see the light of the sky shining through the spaces between the rocks until the opening above me was large enough for me to see the eyes of my helper, a dirty, exhausted dog looking down at me through the matted hair that partially covered its eyes with an expression of empathetic confusion, as though it were asking, "What were you doing on the side of that mountain to begin with?" That is the end of that. More of an emotional response than any kind of like real like metaphor there, but yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to get into that at all to like kind of explain the in the metaphor at all, or you're just going to leave it more of a poetic
I'm okay
kind
leaving
of
it
you
if you
interpret it
guys
how you want to interpret it?
I'm okay not really understanding it fully, especially in this format. I like want to look at it, but also just kind of living in the imagery and the feeling of like being swept away in a landslide or a rock slide.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Experiencing
right.
So it feels
experiencing
appropriate in one way or another,
yeah.
probably to everybody.
Yeah, it was mostly that feeling of like you don't really, you kind of think you know people, and then you sort of a feeling of just being a little foolish to really have high hopes. Like I don't know. They are kind of built back up now after a few days, but in the immediate aftermath, it was like
Hmm.
pretty
When you're getting
devastating.
banged around and smushed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
I don't think
Yes.
we haven't seen nothing yet as far as the amount of
smushing.
smushing that's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah, this is yeah, I'm up at night thinking about that. I've played out various Civil War uh reenactments or pre-enactments, I guess is what it is, of like how things could start to get ugly, and there's a lot of scenarios where things could get bloody.
Yep.
And
But I think it does offer, in terms of silver linings.
Yeah, let's focus on some silver linings.
yeah, I'm
I
ready
just
for
think
that too.
that's really the
I
healthier thing to do. As much as I want, or much as I kind of feel like ruminating,
Hmm.
there's silver linings to discuss, and there's good lessons to take away. So let's focus on that.
I think one of them for me is sort of a very definitive rebuttal of a lot of the excesses of identity politics over the recent years. Like, and I've noticed this a lot in our movement as well. Is this strong urge to be correct and right and and righteous, at the expense of higher ideals like universalism. You see, all the targeted programs and there's like a to the extent that I don't identify as a Republican, really, like there's just too much hateful rhetoric going on that side right now. I've also found myself pretty alienated by a lot of the leftist, social trends like cancel culture and all that stuff is a real thing that has affected a lot of people and has affected me in my work in a lot of ways where I've felt like pushed away. And coming from an angle of seeing the potential and the beauty in universalism to both solve these issues elegantly and efficiently and mathematically, but also to sort of inherently imbue what we do with this message of everybody matters, everybody's equal, everyone has purpose, we should trust everyone and start from there. It's an entirely different and much more inspiring sort of worldview in politics and rhetoric than what I've seen coming from either side, which is basically the other guy sucks. The other people are the bad guys we must overcome. Like, we've become addicted to fighting each other. Everything is about defeating the other. And I don't understand how we ever make progress without working together. I don't understand how one side's victory or the other over the other side ever leads to a best outcome.
The thing that kind of frightens me with that, though, is that like we've got the we talk about kind of how problematic the two-party system is, and sort of how it's almost a mathematical inevitability that if you've got two parties, that you'll eventually sort of the way that we vote has sort of created this two-party
Yeah,
system.
if we have first past the post voting, if the person with the most votes wins, winner take all, it is inevitable to lead to a two-party system. It's not like two parties
But the
is in the
thing I was
Constitution.
wondering
It's
is,
inevitable.
does it actually lead to a one-party system? And if it does, is that pretty scary? Like, if this is the one-party system we're talking about a totalitarian type of system.
Yeah, I mean, there's this I don't know, kind of talk that's been popular and is just continuously popular about, oh, both parties are the same. Like, both parties are clearly not the same. We don't have like a uniparty. Like, the parties are different, and sure, there's a similarity in they're both supported by rich donors. And so, that's certainly a problem when it comes to just how much of an influence money has in our politics. But these parties are quite different from each other. And if we get to this point where, and this is what concerns me the most, is, and it's one of the lessons to take away, I think, is that our information ecosystem is just like royally screwed. And the result of that is that there is no agreeable reality. One side is creating reality entirely out of whole cloth, and the other side is trying to focus on actual reality, but also kind of doing a terrible job of it too. But then the result of that is, how do we learn, and how do we go forward, and how do we debate, and how do we have like this vigorous system of politics where we actually debate and converse and stuff, if like we're in like different universes. And that, that's kind of the concern for me, is going forward, if we have a fully misinformed and disinformed public, to a large degree, with like half of the population, or almost half, being like heavily misinformed. How do we, like, what do we do about that? Like, how do we resolve that? If the system is so bad that, a strong majority of the population is misinformed, then that does lead to basically this kind of de facto one party system, if one party is the one utilizing that and really feeding into it. And so I think one of the takeaways is that the left has to come up with some kind of mechanism of this information ecosystem. Like, you cannot rely on MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, all these traditional mass media, legacy media outlets. Like, there has to be a strong infrastructure. And the conservative ecosystem has been very, very smart and tactical about, going from talk radio, when that became like a point where they could get in on the rise of Fox News, and now with like the whole podcast ecosystem and all of that. Like, it's just heavily oriented towards their ability to push out propaganda and just whatever they want, and people will just hear that over and over again. It just becomes what they think is real. So
Yeah, there's no truth filter really. So whenever any information that comes out, so the one that has the lowest truth filter is actually probably going to get out more, because there's nobody's worried about whether it's true or not. Whereas if you're
is
like
your
a real
house on fire,
journalist,
Josh?
it actually kind of is. There is a fire truck going outside.
You-
I'm right on Wilshire Boulevard, so there's it's kind of a. I'm right down the street from the federal building, so
Just like
there's
I'm imagining that meme right now of like, like you're in the kitchen and the fire is around you and you've got your
yeah,
mug saying it's fine.
it kind of feels like it.
I'm on a
I think
podcast, guys. Just put out the fire.
Yeah,
for me, the idea and the complaint that both parties are basically the same thing is fueled by a reality. Like, they have their differences, but the things that they have both as their failings are at a systemic level above them. Our political infrastructure, our economic, and our informational balance of power leads to this sort of corruption, status quo favoring type stuff that the things people talk about in democracy reform would be attempting to correct at a systemic level. Yeah, and something you said, Josh, makes me think, like, the fear of fighting the two-party system for fear of the one-party system is actually seems like more of a classically conservative stance. Like, the fear of change because it could be worse. Like, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, right? And it's like one thing to understand, like, these terms are so triggering and stigmatized and everything, but conservatism lies within all of us wherever we fear change, and progressivism lies within all of us where we are willing and inspired to fight for something new, and it's always on a case by case basis. and that's
Yeah,
a
I
that's
don't
a
I
gr-
don't fear change. I fear blood. Like I fear like violence.
but I think that's what
If
everyone.
things are changing in a direction that I don't like I can live with that. Like, and I've lived with that most of my life. But like, for things to change in a direction where it's like it's no longer safe to be where you are, that's where I start to get concerned. You know?
Yeah.
The climate is it it's we're at it's at a very delicate little point we're at right now, and I mean
Like
like
I
the sort of social climate is hopefully it's just post election kind of angst and people gloating and people kind of having hurt feelings, but I I'm concerned.
I wrote about this in my latest piece where I got into a little bit about even just, the types of people and how, imagining like back in the day of being in a village where you've got to have some people who are really interested in watching the border and who are worried about like invasions and potential dangers from outside. And their focus is on like the community, and some of those people are even really interested in things staying the same. And then you've got like these people who go out and explore, and they're the ones interested in the unknown, and they're less afraid of that stuff. They actually welcome change and newness and meeting strangers and stuff. And we need both of those people. Like we need those who are focused on traditions and maintaining the status quo, and there needs to be those who go outside of it. And that's also like the birth of if anyone who's ever read Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, about like his monomyth. That's like the story that you can see the story throughout just thousands of years of our stories, where you've got someone who like exits the community and goes outside to find something to like bring back to the community, and that helps like improve everything, and then that becomes like the new status quo. And you have to have that balance between those who are like exploring and those who are staying and who want like who want things to stay the same. But then when it comes to conservatives too, there's those who are focused on status quo, and there are those who are focused on oneness and sameness within the community, and those are two different things. And those who are focused on oneness and sameness are defined as those with like those with authoritarian predispositions. And you can kind of test where that is, as far as like if you ask someone, are they interested in like trying new things, exploring new places, and tasting new foods, then they're someone who's most likely to be kind of that like anti-authoritarian kind of explorer type. And if you have someone who's really just enjoys the same thing and doesn't like to try new things, and let's say when it comes to child rearing, they're more focused on like, they want their kids to be well behaved, and like the explorers would like them to be curious. Like these are differences that are just, it makes us different at a worldview level. And those can be good, but authoritarians are kind of different in that when they actually experience an environment where they feel that there's a threat to oneness and sameness, then they can actually want huge changes very immediately. And so you've got your status quo conservatives that are not interested in that. So when it came to this most recent election, this was an authoritarian election where you've got people who are really activated and they want these big changes. And that's where you had like the Dick Cheney and Liz Cheney and like your very status quo traditional conservatives that were siding with Harris, because in this election Harris was the, let's not go crazy, let's actually maintain our democracy and our system of government, and
Yeah.
let's
It's
not
similar to
like.
what Biden was saying, like nothing's really going to change. Like the kind of stuff people don't want to hear. I saw a fun tweet or an interesting tweet where someone was like, okay, we have left, right, and now forward, but do we need like a backward for balance? And I was like, well, I guess the right kind of feels like it's backward right now. Like we go back to when America was great. Left is stagnation, let's not rock the boat. And
Right.
then, so there,
Yeah.
if you're
It's
putting
like
him
you've got
in,
one group who like dream of the 1950s, and you've got another group who like dream of, I don't know, the 1990s, like early 2000s, Obama era, or like, Clinton era. And but they're not pushing for, say, the Bernie area. That they're not like, all right, how do we actually, what's this progressive kind of great vision that we can align behind? Like, who is this kind of hopeful, really visionary kind of candidate and platform and stuff? And that doesn't exist. That's not the choice.
And
So
I feel
I think some of those who voted for Trump in this election, I think that they're hoping that because Trump is totally willing to like completely ignore all kinds of things and just do things on a whim, then there's like that, out of that riskiness and unknown, then maybe some good things can happen. And I understand that kind of gamble kind of hope, but let's be real. I don't think that he's going to be doing many great things.
yeah.
I just don't.
Well, and I fear blood as well. But part of it is it's felt a lot like 2016 to me, where my fear, and 2020, it's like it felt a lot like the ever since I got basically disillusioned with politics and the Democrats, is despite still voting for them generally, is that status quo tendency while we're sort of headed off a cliff more slowly, right? So I fear the blood that's already happening. I fear the climate change that's already happening. I fear like the descent into economic collapse that's already happening. And Kamala, to me, getting elected would have made certain policies that are more UBI favorable, or like more favorable to me, more likely. But I also felt like that would have resulted in a big pat on the back, like we beat the bad guys sort of moment, where everyone like turns their brain off and like says, great, Kamala's going to save us now, just like we did, Biden's going to save us, Obama's going to save us, where they're all susceptible to these larger systemic forces that are keeping our government from really making the changes necessary for the people. So, the silver lining here for me is that this actually, it not only makes our work more necessary, our outside of government sort of work, but it opens up more of an urgency. Like I'm seeing it in rooms in general already, and have been for, the past year or so, where people in organizations, people in the public, their eyes are opening much wider to the idea of let's just fucking do it. Let's just build it. Let's stop waiting. And more people are like becoming unsatisfied with the arc of moral justice is slow, but it gets there eventually type thinking, because it hasn't been happening, and we're getting more and more polarized and more climate disasters. This guy on Twitter, Skungus, says, I fear the Democrats will learn very little from this election. And, I keep always fearing that. And I have a lot of things I could say about the last few elections that are just, I haven't had an actual chance to vote in a primary for real in like 16 years. So that I feel immediately disenfranchised all the time by the party with Democrat in like democracy in the name. And I'm really grateful to not have, like, I'm very hopeful that they'll take a deep, long, hard look at themselves and make some changes, that a third party has a chance to make some headway, that we can have systemic change. But I'm also really grateful that we're moving ahead with something that is not waiting for that system to solve our problems for us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's important to kind of be able to do both of these things. Like there's a need to do something immediate and real, and that's what Commingle is about. That's what Bootstraps is about, is how that can actually help people like see a wider vision, like in the short term, and actually start helping each other in the immediate term. But then also, yeah, when it comes to say learning lessons to go forward, that's always a question. I don't know. We're in that point right now where there's kind of like a fighting over what the lessons are to learn, and so it is even important right now to help like be a part of that conversation, because there will be a solidifying, and the solidifying could happen with like learning the wrong lessons. So it's good to be part of that conversation right now, to be like, what are the lessons that we should be taking? And I think the lesson, at least one of the lessons we should be taking, aside from the need to really work on fixing our information ecosystem, is universality and economic populism. Like, I think that this was an issue of as simple as being a lot of these voters just are worse off. They looked at, am I better off now than I was 4 years ago? And they just experienced this spike of inflation as a result of global pandemic. It didn't matter why these things happened. There's no real like deep understanding of like causes of inflation, but they just know that food's more expensive, rent's more expensive, and life's harder. And so I'm going to vote against like this current system. And that's something that's happened around the world with like you've got incumbent parties that are having a real hard time and being voted against in every election because of this impact of global inflation. Like people hate rising costs of living. And so this is something that we were talking about even during the pandemic, saying that yes, people need these stimulus checks, and yes, they need like the enhanced child tax credit, but they should have actually continued those things. Like we should have had monthly stimulus checks, and they didn't have to be as large. Like I would have preferred, say, $500 a month stimulus checks for like a year or two or something, versus just like three larger stimulus checks and then just like 6 months of monthly payments for parents only. But I think it really hurt those families to like be in this position where they were getting that help to handle higher cost of living, and then they pulled that money away, and then they ended up pulling away all these other COVID forms of assistance that were helping people, and all that did was make things worse for people.
Yeah.
We should have known that stuff was going to happen. I mean, and I was warning about that happening. Like we actually should make sure that we keep helping people. We should have seen like some kind of monthly payment as being inflation protection, like inflation insurance. Like that's the kind of thing I was pushing in order to help people during that time. And in order, yes, that would have an inflationary pressure, but then we should have done other things as far as like we should have been taxing the rich more to help counter inflation. We should have actually done some kind of excess profit taxes or windfall profit taxes in order to discourage corporations from raising prices. Like there should have done more in order to actually actively discourage these price increases. There should have been a focus on housing supply building and increases in order to reduce rents. Like there should have been a bigger like really focusing on helping people through this inflationary time, instead of just being like, good luck everybody, economy's doing great, unemployment's low, stock market's awesome, GDP is great, what are you complaining about? Like it was a really bad message.
Yeah. And I hope.
Do you what I've got some questions though. Like so there's this common critique of UBI as like, is this just a way for a government to buy votes? And you kind of saw that in Ontario with the guy's name, the guy that suddenly decided UBI was a good idea, or a guaranteed income program was a good idea.
Doug Ford with
Doug
his
Ford,
cancellation of the pilot, but then suddenly universal payment to everyone.
Yeah. Maybe it works. Like
it does work.
I know, like because the checks had Trump's name on it when we got those. Like he signed.
Trump was very smart to do that.
Yeah.
Like Biden kind of did that invisibly. I mean, he not invisibly as in, everyone got a check, but like invisibly as he should have put his name on it, and he should have been like, you're welcome. And he should have been like really focusing on how you liking those checks, like really making it salient. And instead he didn't do that.
Because you think about like how were you doing better 4 years ago, and like 4 years ago was a nightmare. Like I can't believe anybody was like, yeah, that was a good time.
But they like gas was cheaper.
Yeah. It's more like 5 years ago. Like it's 20. It's yeah.
But this idea of buying votes is funny to me, where it's like I have a problem with buying votes if it's buying a certain cohort of people's votes or a certain group of people using their wealth to buy influence. But if it's a universalist like buying of votes, I mean, like if you're returning value to the citizenship at large, I don't see that as an unethical thing, like a buying a vote sort of a thing. It's like, no, this is what I'm going to do for you. and all of your families, so you should vote for me for that reason. It actually is what we should want out of our politicians.
All government, like everything government does, should help you. So, every time someone runs on something and they say, if you vote for me, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, like that's buying votes if you think about it, that way. In which case, every politician is always trying to buy your vote by offering something. Even if it's, Republicans like to run on cutting taxes, that means that you have more disposable income. Like there's always something that they're trying to improve your life.
Yeah,
And basic income
with the
is
money
just
you pay in
universal in doing it.
taxes too. It's like they're basically they're buying your votes with the money, the tax revenue and the government funding to say this is what we're going to do with it that will help you more, or the things
But
you
I
care
guess
about
like
more.
as a message for like people promoting UBI, like if we could say Trump was giving away UBI and he got reelected, we're like, right, like there's something there.
Yeah.
Like it's not a bad thing to have out that like, yeah, if you want,
No.
if all you care about is getting reelected, just do this thing.
Like that was definitely part of this, is where there were, plenty of interviews where people were saying that, they're voting for Trump because at least they got those stimulus checks, like they really remembered those stimulus. And again, they did not remember Biden. They remembered Trump with that. And it's like,
They remember
Trump,
Did you
Biden
actually hear
reducing.
that?
Biden reduced the stimulus check. Actually, he ran on 2,000. And he's like, actually 1,200 because you actually already got 800 from
Right.
Trump, or whatever
It was
whatever
600,
it was.
yeah.
It was like
600,
Are you
1,400, I
kidding?
think. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then like
weak.
with the student debt relief or the forgiveness of loans, like from the very beginning, I knew that that was going to be an issue that could be a problem, because we have been seeing this increase in education polarization, where more and more college graduates are Democrats and more non-college graduates are Republicans. Like this has been an increasing divide. And then so when that came out, I'm thinking a smarter way to do that is to just do basic income. Like, let's do this a universal payment. And then if you have college debt, then that can actually help you pay off that every month's bill payment and more. And then over the course of a couple years, depending on whatever your debt level is, then you're going to be better off with that. And then you also help those who never went there and have like other debts from other things, or maybe they haven't accrued debts, in which case, why should they not get anything because they didn't have a debt? Like they should be helped too. That's the beauty of universality. Like my household benefited quite a bit from the student debt forgiveness. My wife saw a forgiveness of $50,000 over that from Biden's program, and that was like she benefited from that from the being in the nonprofit sector for 10 years. So like that program existed for even through Trump's presidency, where that was a thing. It was something that like Obama set up originally, and so it's not like it wasn't a new thing, but they really leaned into improving that program and other programs to make sure that more student debt was forgiven. And the logic there was, we have to appeal to young voters, and then so we feel if we are forgiving student debt and leaning into that, and we can actually, support our base, and hopefully, hopefully we can benefit from that during the election. And if you do that, if that's your theory of change, then you're ignoring like the blowback from those who don't benefit from that. And I think there was heavy blowback from people saying, "You didn't help me. I don't have a college I don't have a college degree, and you're only for them. So if you're only for them, I'm for
Right.
Trump,
And the
because
implication is a
he
value
got me a stimulus
judgment.
check."
Like these people are worth more than those people, and the South and the working class used to be mainstays of the Democratic Party, and they basically moved into a more education focused elitism that basically wrote off the entire South and people who are religious, and they basically said, oh, they're lost, poor, needy souls, and we have to save them from themselves. And it's obviously something that breeds a lot of resentment, a lot of blowback. And I'm really hoping that part of the taking a strong look at yourselves from the Democratic side is realizing that this endless compromising and like track to the middle, like campaigning with the Cheneys is so bizarre to me. And basically status quo justification and rationalization is going to finally come through as like not an effective policy. Like the whole sort of inspirational progressive message is ready to be accepted. It's no coincidence in my mind that the only Democrat in the last series of elections during the primaries that won over more Republicans than Bernie, and a lot of Republicans liked Bernie because he was honest and he was pushing for economic populism, was Andrew Yang, who was honest and pushing for economic populism. They're very non-status quo candidates, and they were very popular. Like the whole Bernie would have won argument is sort of absurd to me, because I think it's fairly obvious that he was a much stronger candidate than who we threw up there and lost twice with.
Yeah, and I will just mention too that I personally did support the fact that they were uplifting Liz Cheney and others. I disagree with Liz Cheney, a lot of her policies, but I do appreciate that conservatives were stepping up and saying, just because you're Republican doesn't mean you have to vote for Trump. And you can also uplift, country over party, I think was a very strong message. And it may not have won the day, because in the end I think it was just an inflation sentiment and cost of living kind of thing. But I do believe in like big tent politics, and I think part of the problem that led to where we are now is this alienation of people for not agreeing with everything. Like someone is not the enemy because they disagree on this and this. And I think leaning into economic populism in order for that to be successful also means not nitpicking everything and deciding that someone isn't like pure enough to be on your team because that they're, not communicating in these proper ways.
Yeah, and it's not even just like a purity of like you're not going to get elevated. There's been a sort of a cult of demonization, of driving people away. I guess there's like an entitlement to sort of the more leftist identity politics. Like it was to an extent good to see people coming across the aisle and agreeing on a thing, but moving away, like the Cheneys and stuff, to me was more about identity too, about who Kamala was and who Trump was, and not as much about the people. The appeal was to like your sense of the decency of these two candidates rather than the sense of like what they're going to do for like America and do they care about you. It was a lot more about like a sense of rightness and wrongness. And in the same way, like this urge to, I never understood the urge to so rapidly demonize and vilify Musk and Joe Rogan. And I know they're controversial figures, but I think actively trying to make them the Lex Luthors and supervillains of our world has sort of
I mean, to be
pushed a
honest,
lot of
I feel
people away.
Elon Musk has become a supervillain.
Yeah, I
Like,
think it's
I think he
it's an
bought like
unforced
a
error. I wrote a
volcanic
thing about
island
this.
somewhere.
I wrote a thing
Yeah.
about this. It's like it's so sad to me to watch him like taking his Lex Luthor turn.
Yeah.
That because it's been sort of pushed and on him by the rhetoric from the left around the time a year or two before he and Rogan were on their interview was like cancel them, abandon them. They're totally worthless pieces of shit. It's like, what are they going to do?
It
But
kind of fucked up Twitter. I mean, it's like I can't use
Yeah.
Twitter anymore, which I used to
Yeah.
love. Like that used to be a great way to have free expression, and now it's a cesspool of garbage.
It is. There's just
Sorry, Twitter.
so much misinformation, on
Yeah.
Twitter,
I
and he's
guess
like
it
the
is
leading
X, it's not
person.
Twitter.
He's
Yeah.
the leading spreader. But yeah, I mean, I think this all goes down. I think the kind of the underlying dynamic, like the elephant in the room, is the pandemic. Like it really impacted a lot of people and drove people in certain directions, and then there were kind of feedback mechanisms in place due to this, public health emergency, where I think that's where like the origin of Elon Musk's change kind of, and Joe Rogan's too, like both of that came out of that. Elon Musk was upset from the shutdowns that personally impacted Tesla factory and things. He hated all of that, and then he pushed against it. And then you had the pushback to that saying, by ignoring all this, then you're part of the problem, and that helped polarize. And so I think the pandemic was really this polarizing force to a large degree. And that's also what led to the inflation. Like people will blame Biden for this stuff and ignore the fact that this was experienced all over the world and that we actually did the best job getting out of it. Like we are the ones who reduced the inflation the fastest, and we're the ones with the highest GDP out of this. Like we really did some good stuff under Biden getting out of the pandemic as far as our economy restoring. But he doesn't get credit for that, and people are just upset about what the pandemic did to them without blaming the pandemic.
Right. And getting back to like silver linings and opportunities, I feel like what we have is what we have. It does provide a very strong opportunity to present a very positive, big tent populist, not only idea and but also a mechanism and an action people can take. And we have, to me, it's like there's going to be no end to the political circus of the next 4 years, and a lot of people are going to be mad about a lot of things. But if we build something that works for more and more people and grows, we've got 4 years to sort of lay the groundwork for an idea. And while everything we're doing is very non-political and coming from a let's just try it out space, we're trying it out to test the bigger idea in full view of the public with a lot of attention. So who knows what that can help sort of move the conversation toward in people's minds more broadly. Like how should we approach things at the county, state, federal levels? Or even in the private sector. We're offering an alternative rather than a blame. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of that kind of thing happen in this environment where the screaming at each other back and forth over and over has repeatedly not worked. And it begs for another approach.
One thing that I'm really excited about when it comes to commingle, and this is I think that's important to society, and that it's not the obvious as far as the potential income and security boost. That's a big deal. But I think that commingle, like you said before, that the joke is that people kind of think it's a dating app with the word commingle, and like leads people to think, oh, this is about like meeting people, right? But I think one of the biggest problems of our time is this feeling of like alienation and isolation. And even if people don't recognize, they need this sense of belonging. And this like lack of feeling of belonging is behind a lot of this anti, sentiment, this anger and frustration. People need to feel like they belong to something. And I think that it's exciting that maybe one of the things that can happen out of commingle is just bringing people together who are part of something. And they may not agree on lots of other things, but if they're part of the commingle community, then that's something that they share. And maybe there can be these spaces in communities where people who are part of commingle can actually come together and be part of something that can be like the starting point. I'm excited to see what happens there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to me, like democracy is like alive and well, and it's like incredible. It's way more than we even think of it as being like it has democracy has sort of transcended politics at this point. Like we each have such an ability to express ourselves in a way that like nobody ever perceived through technology, right? Like we all have tools to be able to kind of do and say what we want to do, to the point of like it's so crowded with talented people trying to do stuff that like the hard part now is like actually having your cool idea rise up above everybody else's cool idea, right? And so like the political world is almost like so far behind that. Like it does not, like even the way we vote, it does not represent really what is truly happening in in our democratic society. So like I think having some little tool that we've got here that at least in kind of works at that level is important. And yeah, hopefully in the same way that people kind of like band around the internet as a thing, like just being able to talk freely on YouTube or like we're doing right now. Like that, we couldn't have done this 10 years ago, right? And or maybe 20 years ago,
Yeah.
but whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
the political world has not kept up with that at all.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Scott, that this is how I think of Commingle is on its surface, it's about connecting people's finances and infrastructure and economic safety, like a solidarity mechanism. But the key to all of the stuff we're doing is connecting people. And Commingle is the biggest metric is going to be how many people are on the platform doing this thing, how many people are helping each other, getting helped. Same with Bootstraps. It's not about like explaining the idea of UBI to people. It's more about connecting people to the real human stories of these other 20 Americans who have lives outside of their bubbles who they wouldn't understand, really being in it with them and living with them and understanding each other. It's about breaking down the barriers of our bubbles, of othering. And I love the name. People always give us crap about Commingle. There was even I won't get into that. There was, but people have opinions about like what it shouldn't be, but no one really has a strong opinion about what it should be. I came to the project; it was already called Commingle when Josh first reached out to me, and it's always been in the back of our minds, like this could change at some point if it needs to. But I've always kind of liked it. I like the idea that it really is a mingling of people, of finances, of purpose, of values. And so I'm mostly inclined just to defend it and stick with it until people get it, get what it really is.
I do wonder, like, how much money is actually a factor in how democracy works. That, like, I think it's pretty huge. Like, but I would be curious, like, hypothetically, like, if you could actually map somebody's bank account to how they voted and map it to, like, is it better now, or is it better now than it was 4 years ago? Like, do you think those metrics would actually add up to how they voted? You know what I mean? Like, is that question, when everybody says it at the exit polls, people were saying, well, it's the economy. Like, that was what drove my decision. Like, I wondered, is it really? Like, could you actually say, because the number in my bank account was higher 4 years ago than it is now?
Well,
or is it easier for me to buy groceries, like,
so part of the
relative
data
to what the actual cost of
this
goods
part
is,
of the
right?
confusion is from the data that I've seen is that if you ask individuals, yeah, if are they better off now, and actually most of them say that they are. It's and that's part of the frustration is that there is this strong belief that everyone else is like doing bad, like that the society as a whole is doing worse, and then that's what's causing a lot of this. It's actually less personal feeling because personally people do feel better off in general. There's certainly people who don't feel that way, and I think they're the ones who definitely voted in a certain way. But then there's others who are doing just fine and they still voted that way because of this, because of why I point to the information ecosystem, that there's just this belief because that's what's been spread. That's what we've been seeing tons of in regards to, oh, things are horrible. It's a tactic that was successful. I did want to bring up, since we're again like focusing on silver linings, let's just talk about some of the possibilities under a Trump administration.
Can I just go back one
UBI.
second before you look at this, though? I want to add one thing to what you said. I think one thing that's very important about what we're doing and what we've taken longer to set up is the reason the information ecosystem is so corrupt is because it's all about making money, not about connecting people. And if we want to create something that's about connecting people, it can't have that legal obligation to enrich its shareholders, make money. It has to be built as a service. And that's something that doesn't exist in an information environment. So one of the things we're trying to do is build a model that shows how businesses can be businesses without having to play the usual game. Okay, we can go on.
Okay, so this is Salim Ismail, and he was actually one of our guests when we were doing these on Twitter, the Spaces. So that's already interesting, something for people to know. But I'm seeing kind of more of this expression, and so I do want to make sure that this is covered. So yeah, here's that video that Peter Diamandis shared.
If I could see one thing that this administration should go after, it's UBI.
Well, why? If jobs are not a thing, if jobs are not concerning, why should they go
It
after
just
UBI?
unleashes entrepreneurship. All the UBI studies have shown that when you give people,
I agree with that.
and it's really important to note that you got to find the balance between giving people too much money and they become too fat and they don't work, and not having enough to serve. You want to hit the balance where they can survive but not be happy, right? And we've studied these experiments when you can hit that balance, which an AI could figure out, by the way. You then have a hugely productive economy, but everybody's baseline is still covered. And then you can dismantle government services. And this is an area where if the Republicans are interested, this is an area, and here's where it's really fascinating. I don't know if you've tracked what's been going on in the UBI space, but a large number of cities and states and countries around the world have blocked experiments on UBI.
No.
They've
Seriously?
said you are not allowed to experiment with UBI.
Why? Because they don't want it to be true?
They're governments. They're scared to not be needed. So they've literally passed legislation saying all the towns in my state are not allowed to experiment with UBI. That's freaky. That's the area where I think a Trump-type administration could go, are you kidding? Get rid of all of that crap and let people experiment with it, because you need more experiments.
Yeah, so I mean, we've talked about this before with like the banning of the pilots. And one of the things I think is interesting about even like kind of using that as a selling point, like he's saying that let's say MAGA maybe and Trump could be someone who looks at this and says, wait a second, like you can't. We're talking about the ability for UBI to replace a bunch of stuff. The last thing you should do is prevent these pilots and whatever. Like that's bad. And yet, when it comes to who's banning these pilots, it's actually like those who funded Trump's campaign. It's those like this is the Project 2025 people. It's Heritage Foundation. Project 2025 is actually explicitly anti-UBI. So, like, I do not think that it's got much of a chance under Trump, but there is this argument to be made that there are ways and reasons and stuff for it to be embraced in order for a way to again, Elon Musk is part of the new Doge cabinet, the Department of Government Efficiency. He's supposed to want to take an axe to things to simplify government. And yeah, universal basic income could be this tool of simplifying government. Do I think that that's what they're going to do? No, but I do believe it's important to make that argument, and maybe
if
it
it's
can like
not
be
a
furthered.
bad strategy, like that we, if the word gets out there, like I just liked hearing him saying that. Like it was like, yeah, that's nobody's really going to argue with it. Like even I think Conrad had that when he was on John Stossel, where as soon as he talked about it was a way to cut government programs, then everybody's like, oh yeah, okay, maybe a good idea, right?
But they'll never do that.
But if it is like this sort of like we're going to take an axe to government and get rid of it and just do this, just replace it with a UBI and this like big fell swoop fuck you to everything, then I'm kind of on board. Like it's not the worst.
Yeah.
I don't like that it's the red team doing it, but I still am like, okay.
It's funny. I can hear the screams or groans, and there's certain things he said that I'm like, I know it's for a very particular audience from a very particular worldview. And I think a UBI that came out about in those sort of circumstances would still be massively transformative. It would have a lot of political headwind. Scott, I put a quote in our like little private chat in the studio, or a tweet that would be interesting to bring up in this context, which is some guy named Chance Lucina, who's a UBI advocate, philosopher type, put something that I really agreed with. You finding it? And I thought it was on point. And it's about this, like, not only do people want to wait for the government to fix things, but they also want to wait for certain heroes to fix things. Like Elon will do it, or OpenAI will do it, or it. And look, they talked about it, and I just kind of want to level set expectations for people about how much we can just count on these things to happen.
Okay, so here's this thing, and
Okay, so
just you want to read it aloud?
yeah. So it says, one problem with the tech leadership is that they talk about an age of abundance as this future they alone can bring us to. When the age of abundance came half a century ago, but the political will to justly distribute it never materialized. Productivity skyrocketed, wages stayed the same. The top 0.01% kept the gains, easily over $50 trillion by any sober estimate. Without the political will to change it, the lower classes will simply continue to stay poor, no matter how much abundance tech companies create. It's sad seeing Sam Altman and Elon Musk talk like prophets and have people listen to them so eagerly when they're just playing a hype game and hiding the ball so they can get more and bigger investors. And, I might not be quite so ungenerous with my reading of Sam and Elon's motivations or what they're likely to do. But I think it's worth noting that, both of them, Sam has put more skin in the game when it comes to this, but both of them regularly talk about basic income as something that will happen sort of inevitably as an outcome of AI and some utopian future. And it's worth always remembering that we should have had this decades ago, that we can justify having this now, that it's a much deeper thing than like someday when we all get put out of our jobs, then somehow it'll materialize. Because it's very easy for things to become more autocratic, more oligarchic, more disparate. We could kill each other over scraps, or we could figure it out. And waiting for some like person in a position of authority or someone we admire to figure it out for us is not a wise strategy. We have to do it ourselves.
But it is like, it's an idea that, I mean, Elon Musk knows that it is sort of like, he sees it as like this kind of thing that will eventually happen. But like,
Well, he
as
says
a person
that.
in government, like, which he kind of is at this point, like, he sort of does have the power to be able to make it happen, right? So it is kind of it's a like shit or get off the pot kind of situation for him if he actually does have that belief, which as
And
a smart
if
person, like, he does see this as
Like,
a
at this
sort of
point, I don't believe
necessity.
him. Like, I'll just come out and say I do not believe him. I used to, and I think that he's been using it as a marketing tool. I think he's been saying basically that the products that I'm creating and will create are so amazingly awesome that we will need universal basic income, because you will not be able to find a job, because these products are going to be so good it can do your job and every other job too. And so basically, invest in my company and buy my stuff and help me get rich, because it's awesome. Like, we are creating the absolute amazing godlike kind of things, and it, like, that's the necessity. Like, I do not believe him that this is something that is a great idea, like, on its own. I think that if he did believe that, he would be doing something. Like, Sam Altman has actually put his money where his mouth is. He put a lot of money behind the basic income experiment, and he talks about it as something, and he does not say this is something that we only need when AGI happens. He's like getting out in front of it, whereas Elon has explicitly said that he is not for UBI at this moment in time, and he is only for it when basically all the jobs have been automated. And I don't consider that a pro UBI viewpoint. If you think that UBI is a bad idea right now, and it's only a good idea in some potentially distant future, or at least in a very dystopian, when things have already really happened to a degree where there's tons of suffering. Like, I want to avoid all of that. And if someone is talking about these concerns and isn't trying to actively avoid those problems, I don't believe them. I don't think that they're really supporters.
I think if there is a potential in the next 4 years for Elon to push for a UBI, he would have to have been pushed very hard to do so, and it would be a sort of a pitch of like, yeah, this is a way to like simplify a lot of our programs and cut a lot of waste and put it through a more efficient thing. But I don't really see it happening on its own. And yeah, I should clarify, I don't mean to like lump Elon and Sam together in general as having the same approach. It's just they were both in the tweet, and they both are people in positions of power who have a lot of work on their plate. They have a lot of different agendas, and we can't wait for them to make UBI happen for us.
I will say, like, silver lining wise, again, like trying to see the positives in this stuff. And so here I'll share this too. Okay, so the point I want to make here is that when it comes to populism, there is this desire to be, literally popular. Like, you're appealing to the majority of people. And so there's a lot of like lying that Trump can do where, he can basically do bad things and then tell people that they're doing great and these things are great, and maybe they'll believe that. I don't know to what degree that'll work. So maybe at some point, like, let's say, for example, he passes the tariffs and all sorts of tariffs. He's been saying that that is a great thing, and that it will like reduce inflation, and it'll reduce the deficit, and just be amazing. And of course, like, the reality, these things will actually increase prices, and the cost of living will go up for quite a few people because the prices will go up for for all these goods that are imported. And as a result of that, people will get upset, and they'll hopefully blame him for doing these things. And in which case, like, I don't see basic income going along with the tariffs, but maybe in response to the tariffs, that could be something. Just like when Trump did the tariffs and all these like farmers and stuff were impacted, those who raise pigs and export them to China and stuff were in regards to like retaliatory tariffs. Like, those were things happened, and then Trump responded to that by providing subsidies to the people who were hurt by them because he didn't want to suffer politically from that.
Or if it's a tariff
One
dividend.
possible benefit, one possible benefit is that the tariffs will hurt people, and that because he's a populist, then he will want to figure out a way to not be hurt by that and make sure that they still like him despite this. And so I bring up this my article about the fair tax, because the fair tax, for those who don't know, this is a policy proposal that's very popular among Republicans. And what it would do is replace income taxes with a national sales tax. And as part of that replacement, there is an understanding that the cost of basic goods and services will go up. Basically, if the poverty line is, $15,000 right now, then it will end up being, say, like $19,000 post national sales tax. In which case, there needs to be this like $5,000 UBI, and what fair tax calls it is a family consumption allowance. So it's a recognition that you don't want to push families into poverty. You don't want to push all these people and Americans into poverty because of this sales tax. So you have to like balance that with a rebate, and that rebate is called the family consumption allowance, but it is a UBI. So the fair tax includes this $279 per month UBI. And yeah, it goes to everybody in response to that. So I think that there's an argument to be made that the tariffs will hurt people just like a national sales tax would without a family consumption allowance. And that the Republicans who support a fair tax and the family consumption allowance will say, hey, like, we've got a ready-made solution for this. Let's actually provide this amount of money to everyone. And it would be very popular politically. And they will never call it a basic income, but they will say that, hey, let's give people money. Stimulus checks are really popular, right? And we can counter the impacts of these tariffs. And the tariffs will be popular because that they have this component that actually helps all these people in other ways. So to me, that's a potential silver lining.
I also think anytime something like that is implemented and creates the infrastructure by which to give people these dividends or tax rebates or whatever, and they sort of demonstrate themselves in practice, if it's visible, like in people's paychecks and stuff, that it is a good way to allocate the revenue from some sort of new tax that raises cost of living expenses or whatever, is to give it back to the people as a dividend. And then it's like, once we understand that, we can be like, okay, well, why don't we do a carbon tax, or why don't we do whatever, and say, if that money is going to us, then we're the owners of it. And it's a way to make people feel invested.
You know,
I do like the term prebate is actually a nice, people don't like UBI. You can call it a prebate, and it seems like that's a lot more appealing.
yeah, I think that's more, it's actually more accurate. It's
Right.
saying that instead of waiting, instead of looking at this as tax money paying for stuff, it's saying that the government actually creates the money and provides that money to people, and then taxes happen afterwards. So, like, yes, it is a prebate. You're not getting a tax rebate. You're getting this prebate, and then taxes happen afterwards. So I think it's even like a better way of looking at just basic income in general. But yeah, when it comes to like a national sales tax prebate, it's important that people get the money in advance of the higher prices so they can afford the higher cost of goods.
I do expect
Yeah.
that anytime we get a policy, our path to UBI type policies won't involve policies that have UBI in the name, dividend, prebate, rebate, tax, negative tax, whatever is politically feasible in those places. One thing you were saying before about what Trump could do, part of me wonders, is he now, like, with these policies that some of them are likely to actually be bad ideas, a lot of them, in terms of their intended outcome and the economics of it. I think of how the Democrats generally operate, in terms of it's much more effective to not get something done and then raise money on being blocked than it is to get something done.
Yeah.
You double the impact of that with it being a bad idea in the first place. So you can say, we want tariffs, we want all these things, and the Democrats blocked us. It might actually be a pain, additional pain for their messaging and their rhetoric that I think they took both houses, right? They took House and Congress, or House and Senate.
It's not official yet, I think, for the House. It's just very, like, it has been called by a couple sources, but not like, the AP and whatnot yet. But it does look most likely that they'll have the House.
So they're sort of in the position Obama was for the next 2 years when he started. And their expectation is they'll do a lot of things, and it could go a lot of ways for them. I think either they succeed in doing a lot of things, and those things, a lot of them are bad, and they look bad, or they don't succeed, and then they look incompetent, but they can also blame the Democrats for stopping things from happening, and probably raise a lot more money based on that. I'm pretty cynical about like that systemic level influence.
Government ineffectiveness at this point is our friend, I think. I think we're going to hope that things are not as effective as they want.
Well, like, one thing that I think is definitely going to happen is that the Senate filibuster is gone. And this is like an argument that I was making even under Biden when he had the opportunity to get rid of the filibuster. I just believe that the Senate filibuster shouldn't exist, and I don't think that people should be arguing we shouldn't get rid of it because we're going to need it in the future. I was thinking, oh, you watch. Like, if Trump actually wins again, it's gone, because he will not stand for it. He will not say, I understand why 40% of the Senate should actually block what I want. It's gone. Like, that's one of those things where I think it should be gone. And so I support that, because once it's gone, it's gone. But also, it will be gone, and that'll make it so much harder for Democrats to do anything about it. But I think that's the reality, is it's gone, and they should have actually recognized that, and they should have been the ones to get rid of it and do what needed to be done. And instead, they didn't, and that's one of the reasons why I feel they lost, is because Republicans are coming out under Trump and they're willing to do all kinds of things. And if you're willing to do anything and you're like showing people that you are willing to like do anything, then a lot of people love that because it's saying that you're not going to let like this bureaucracy stand in the way. I think it's a really popular message. And the Democrats are the ones who are saying, I think that the process is more important. I think the bureaucracy is important. And I think that all of these things that prevent anything from getting done is important. And that's not a good message.
But yeah, it kind of depends on where you're drawing the line as to like which rules you're willing to break to get done what you needed to get done. And like some rules that are in place are a big pain in the butt, and probably shouldn't be there and just make things run smoothly. But then like what other things are you willing to turn your back on just because it's standing in your way? Like, is that basic human decency? Is it like the lives of other humans? Yeah, that's where it starts to get worrisome. Like, you don't know where that line is. And my fear is that as Trump gets in there and starts realizing that they'll go along with anything, like then the sort of thirst for power will, historically a thirst for power doesn't go away. Like you just have to keep like,
Right.
satiating it with whatever. If it starts to seem like I can just make these protesters shut up with a tank, then he's going to like that. Like that's going to make him feel good, right? That's the
Yeah.
way he seems to think. So that's what I worry about.
It does seem to me like the political pendulum is swinging real hard right now. Like we hit some sort of resonant frequency in the background that's just making it so. And that's part of the reason I feel like it could swing real hard the other way in 4 years or 2 years or whatever, more and more populist. And to me, it's like that can be a good or a bad thing if because there's authoritarianism on all sides, and anything that weakens democracy and voice and collaboration, to me, in the long term is a bad thing. So I feel extra impetus to like be part of a movement to bring people back together and back into the big tent. Yeah, and I'll measure like our success and what we're doing to the extent that we can do some of that.
I think another silver lining, and this I think ties in too with the tariffs, and so like for the same reason that tariffs will be bad, and then potentially they will want to respond with something to counteract that. I think when it comes to the Department of Government Efficiency that Elon and Vivek are going to be doing, and theoretically axing a bunch of stuff, again, that will have negative repercussions. We know that will, and potentially a response from them to counter that, because again, they're populists, could be some amount of basic income or something that looks like a basic income. And if they don't do it too, like let's say a bunch of stuff gets axed and then the Democrats come into power and then they're looking to do something, there will be a choice. Like, do you restore like 100 different things? Or is that an opportunity to say, let's do one thing that accomplishes all these things to a large degree? In which case, if they had embraced universality, like if that's one of the lessons that they come out of this and say, we need to do more universal stuff, then potentially wanting to respond to the loss of like all of these programs that the Republicans never actually did anything to rectify and counteract the negatives for, maybe that's an opportunity for Democrats to actually say, okay, like a universal basic income makes sense in this response because
Right.
we want universality and there's all this stuff that's been axed.
I think that would lessen the resistance to from people on the left who fight against replacing any sort of programs with basic income.
Right.
Just like
Yeah, because they're already
instinctively
gone.
fight to protect welfare as we know it. Because if welfare as we know it is gone, then
Right.
we wouldn't be replacing it. We would be like directly as a swap. We would be putting something in place that isn't there anymore. So it becomes a lot easier to say, here's what we should do rather than here's what we should swap. So yeah, theoretically, that makes the UBI case and the universal healthcare case and things like that easier to make as just a big new movement rather than a fix. It's still really will suck if a lot of people get, thrown out into the cold in the interim. So that hurts.
You're saying that like Elon and Trump are like populists. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, I don't actually see that as like I don't think they actually care what the sort of bigger population. I mean, yeah, they care what they think of them, but it doesn't really matter. Like,
Well, there's a difference I always make between populism and demagoguery. Like a populist is someone who speaks for the people, and the level that you can call yourself like a true populist in my mind is to the level that you mean it. Like, so the rhetoric coming from Trump is often very populistic, but I think he's lying a lot of the time.
Right.
Whereas like with Bernie, I thought he was telling the truth, which makes on the populist to demagogue spectrum, they lie on different spots. So, the question is populistic messaging is working because people are ready for populism, in my opinion, but they'll take whatever comes closest to it. And right now, the closest thing we have to populism is someone who's pretending to be populist, who's being a
I would
demagogue.
also say that a way of looking at populism is like anti-elitism, where like Trump is definitely anti-elite. He's been running on that from the very beginning with Drain the Swamp. There's this belief that like all of these problems originate from DC and the political elites in DC. So like even if like Trump and Elon are both, billionaires, when we say populist, part of that, especially for them, is this anti-elitist sentiment where they're going
Right.
to axe a bunch of experts in the quote unquote like political elites, and that's where the populism comes from. It's like people are sick of these suit and tie politicians who talk out of both sides of their mouth. And yes, Trump is absolutely a liar who speaks out of both sides of his mouth, but they don't see him that way. Like it's crazy that you do polls and they think of Trump as being, a majority of them are like, he's like the most honest politician, ever. He really tells it like it is. That's what I mean too by populist, is this screw like the traditional political apparatus.
I mean, I don't think a lot of them are voting for the guy. I think they're voting for the words. They're voting for the populism. A lot of people really dislike him, but they see everyone in politics as lying, and at least want
Yeah.
to put their vote in the hat for the ones who are lying by saying the words that they believe more. Yeah, I think.
but now that the vote has been cast, like, what good are the people to Trump anymore? He doesn't even need to answer to them. He doesn't even need to have any sort of like I'm with you kind of message.
Well,
even.
he's going to want them when he runs for his third term,
I know.
Can't wait.
Mhm.
That'll be fun. But I mean, I do feel like
You laugh, but I don't know.
I do feel like this is an
Yeah,
opportunity
he'll try
for the
if he lives for it.
I do feel like this is an opportunity for the next election to be very, very different. Like I think we're in for even more of a roller coaster ride, where I feel like the last 3 elections were just like try the same thing, try the same thing, try the same thing. I think the Democrats are going to have to change. I think third parties are going to get more bold. I think, Trump might run for a third term. Like anything's on the table at this point. So a lot of people need to be working hard in the next 4 years to like prepare for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like how Putin works, like he holds elections, but they always seem to go in his favor, right? Like he's
Yeah. Same with Orban.
Yeah, like
Yeah, and it's not just, it doesn't have to just be Trump running again. He could be too exhausted. It could be his kids. It could be JD Vance followed by Eric Trump, followed by Barron Trump. I mean, there's dynastic ambitions.
Yeah, he's thinking
possible as
dynastically,
well,
for sure.
Which, that sucks. I don't care who the dynasty is. I don't want a dynasty. I want a democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton, at least was an excuse that a lot of people used, as saying, I just don't want another Clinton again. Like, I don't want a dynasty. And those same people who are anti-Hillary, I'm sure they'll be fine with a Barron Trump or a Don Jr. But like there is this, I think that's an accurate statement to say that a lot of Americans, at least say that they don't want a dynasty.
I think that's where a lot of the energy would drained out of the left wing, is that it doesn't feel like we've had a choice in the last 12 years. Hillary was anointed, and then Biden was anointed, and then Kamala was anointed. Like, we didn't actually vote. So what is that if not a dynasty? That's another thing about in 4 years from now. It's hard for me to think of who's the obvious next person to be anointed, because they're all either too old or too damaged to touch, right? So now I feel like maybe we'll have a real primary, and maybe somehow the DNC won't totally rig it. But maybe also there'll be a lot of energy in the independent world to do something different.
Yeah, and I guess I will just say I don't want to use the word rig. I'll just push back a little bit on that. Where the Democrats, they definitely will put their foot on the scale, but I think that's different. There was definitely a foot on the scale for Hillary against Bernie, and clearly, I think I agree that was the wrong thing to do, both democratically speaking, and also because I think Bernie would have won but the primary without that foot on the scale, and I think that Bernie would have beaten Trump also. So that in itself is something. But I guess as far as lessons to learn, and this is my 2 cents as well, I don't think that, like, I think the cake was baked as soon as Biden decided to run again. He took the wrong lessons himself from his 2020 win. He looked at this as being like, I alone am like the guy who can beat Trump. I'm the anti-Trump. And so he decided that he was going to run again because he was the only one that could beat Trump. But because of the realities of the pandemic, again, he won, I think, to the degree he did because of the pandemic and what that was doing. Like, people were like, I want Trump out of office. Like, he's the absolute wrong person. I need someone who has lots of experience and just a normal politician to get us through this thing, and not this like bull in a china shop kind of situation. So he benefited from the pandemic, and he was hurt by the pandemic because of the inflation afterwards. And if he had just would have said, as he originally said, that I'm going to pass the torch to the next generation, then there would have been a real primary. Although even then, it's very possible that Kamala would have come out of that primary as the favorite, and she would have won that anyways, in which case I think she probably still would have lost, because again, we really do need like that actual next generation who is completely separate from Biden and who is pushing like a non-status quo visionary kind of message. And I don't know, maybe Yang would have run again in this kind of scenario where Biden actually refused to run, and maybe he would have actually beaten Kamala in such a situation, or maybe someone else would have that had a visionary message. But I will just say that there's a lot of hand wringing going on about would have, could have, should have. Is there a way that Kamala could have won? And if we'd had a primary, would we have won? And I just think a lot of that is just wrong. I just think that it was
Right.
really kind of set from the get-go.
I'm just glad it'll be a blank slate for the next time. Like, doubling down on the same strategies is going to be much harder to even come up with a way to do. I'm sure they can figure it out, but yeah.
So this next thing I wanted to mention, and this feeds into, again, kind of like the messages to what we should kind of like pull out from what happened, what is there to learn. And so we talked about this at probably a previous space, and it was a previous episode of this, but one of the things that pissed off a lot of people in New York City was this program where there was a food program to feed all these immigrants who they had sought asylum, and this is a legal process. They were legally there, and they're not allowed to work. Like, they're legally not allowed to work, so you have to feed them. Like there's just no other way around that. You have to get food to them. So the mayor of New York looked at this and his team, and given the choice, like they were feeding them and had cost a lot, and they decided, well, it's actually much cheaper. Like we can just give them debit cards, and we can save a lot of money by just giving them debit cards instead of actual food, and then they can go into local businesses, buy the food. They'll be happier because they'll be able to choose the food that they would rather have. The businesses would be happier because they're actually getting more customers, and the taxpayers happier because they're spending less money on this program. But, and this is like the reality of these kinds of programs, this non-universality, is that it pissed off a lot of people, because if you see, them getting help and we're not getting help, so I'm finding it harder to buy food, and then like they're getting money for food. How screwed up is that? And so that kind of fed into this anger, and that's the result of non-universality. If we made sure that, would they have been as upset? Like imagine an alternate reality where everyone in New York has a universal basic income, and then, and let's say the amount is pretty significant too. Let's say it's near $1,000 per month or something. Would they be as upset about these immigrants coming in and they're getting like $200 per month on a debit card for food? I don't think that they're going to be as pissed off. I think that the anger and the outrage comes from being ignored and excluded. And I hope that's another potential lesson to appreciate. And so this program has been canceled. Like there was a lot of anger, and they just said, we're going to stop doing this. And so now they're going to spend more money. It's the amount they're going to spend on these immigrants is now going to double. And the argument here is that, oh, there are actually going to be fewer immigrants, is like one thing. But that's the thing. Like that's the thing that really gets me, is like, if you are a conservative and you're financially conservative, you want to actually spend less taxpayer money, then you should be for cash regardless. And yet this is like the outrage that comes from this, is if you only give cash to certain segments, then that's going to piss people off. So the answer is universality.
Or don't help people at all. I
Right.
mean, which
That's
is
true.
an
That's
option.
true in all of these cases. All of these places where there's legal attacks against the basic income pilots in mostly red states, but everywhere the case being made is like you're using government dollars and you're making value judgments about certain sectors of the population and leaving others out. So stop it. Yeah, and I understand. I understand that resentment. There's a lot of people that are also really struggling, and to be not only to be like set aside being told like you are part of the oppressor because of your identity, but or it's bad enough to just be not oppressed enough or disadvantaged enough or struggling enough to be deserving. And like, why would you build a policy that way, especially when those policies in implementation are a lot more costly and inefficient and cumbersome? Just none of it ever makes sense to me at all, like from an engineering standpoint. And then from a psychology standpoint, you're basically telling people, wait your turn, you haven't had it so rough. It's like, how are they not gonna react negatively to that? It's just silly to me.
There is some news that I wanted to get to too, that I think is good to cover. Just squeeze some in outside of the discussion we've been having. And so one of the things I want everyone to know is that USAID has signaled a strategy shift. So like they're actually legit championing unconditional cash transfers now, like internationally. So I think this is like one of the big wins that and impact that Give Directly has had, is that Give Directly came in and helped show that there was like a strong scientific basis based on hard experimental data that we should just be doing unconditional cash. And that has grown over time to the point where now USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development, is actually saying we're actually like we believe strongly now in unconditional cash. So going forward, that's what they're going to be really leaning on is unconditional cash. And that to me is just, that's a great development to see us going in that direction.
And
Yeah.
so when does the U.S. get to be on their list for USAID? When can we qualify to have this?
It's from the U.S. I mean, that's a thing that I put something else in the chat, Scott, that's relevant to this if you want to pop it up. But Give Directly has been beating the drum for a long time and making the case that we're hoping to do in the U.S. of just radical efficiency improvements on these things. And we're seeing in like this year, we've been doing like little exclusive screenings for like foundations and types of people, but the eyes are getting much wider at the idea of radical direct cash programs. I've been working on this for like 8 years trying to fundraise in this space, and it was crickets for the first 7. So a lot more people are excited to do stuff in this space, and I think Give Directly gets a ton of credit for that, along with like just the circumstances of our economy. And I just saw this today. You reminded me of where GiveWell, after like a couple of years, reevaluated. Like Give Directly is always at the top of, or in the top 10 of GiveWell, I think. But they've sort of drifted down. Like Malaria Nets are always at the top. And GiveWell, for those who don't know, is an organization that rates charitable giving options in terms of, the number of lives you can save per dollar, like just a very mathematical way to say what's the best bang for my buck in terms of giving back to people. And Give Directly has been up there since for a while, every time I've checked. And they just did a reassessment and they amped up their evaluation of Give Directly by a factor of 3 or 4 times in terms of how effective it is in terms of helping people, how effective it is just to give people cash. So this seems like pretty big news to me in terms of really shaking up the philanthropy space. And Give Directly has been very focused on foreign aid, same with U.S. aid. But that's what we're bringing to the U.S. in 2025 is this outlet for all of these organizations that are seeing the impact and efficiency of direct cash to do turnkey programs to try it out in the U.S. And we're hoping to show the same sort of thing, like orders of magnitude more efficiency and impact than standard ways of giving.
Along these lines of more evidence too, this is another news piece I wanted to make sure people knew about. This is a brand new study about what Iran has been doing with their what it really looks like a universal basic income, even if they didn't mean to do it. So here's the abstract of that paper. Despite growing interest in universal basic income, evidence of its impact remains limited. To address this gap, we examine household behavior 3 years after Iran's 2010 reform, which replaced energy subsidies with unconditional flat cash transfers of $710 per capita annually, including children. We first show that the reform led to a redistribution similar to UBI, with the top 20% as net payers and the bottom 60% as net recipients. While the reform does not significantly affect labor supply, we find substantial consumption responses among both net payers and receivers. Our findings reveal significant improvements in nutrition, both in quality and quantity, as well as increased education spending among net recipients. These results challenge pessimistic views in the UBI literature regarding non-productive spending and laziness among cash recipients, and suggest the long-term potential of UBI for child development and human capital investment, especially in contexts where most recipients are not poor.
That's fascinating. Do you know how big 710 is in terms of cost of living in Iran?
It's up there. It's a significant percentage of median income. So it's really like around $1,000 per month. I didn't do that calculation
what 1,000
recently,
would be here
but
is 700 there.
Yeah, you're looking at something that that most people would agree as a basic income, and it's not like a tiny basic income. It's really like basically a poverty level kind of amount. It's pretty
And that's
good
one
as far
thing
as
I
what it
think people
does.
need to keep in mind when they're looking at basic income pilots and programs and direct cash things in different countries. Is cost of living is such a big factor between countries, which is part of the reason it makes it hard to do just a global basic income. One of the things Give Directly has done to great effect is start setting up shop in places that, yes, they cost a little bit more because they don't have the infrastructure to easily get money to people, so they need more staff. But also a basic income in Kenya looks more like a couple of bucks a day or something like that, rather than like $40 a day in the US, right? So now you can demonstrate the model as they have with a certain number of millions of dollars. They've been able to do very long-term pilots. They've been able to do full saturation pilots with 10,000 people in a village all getting it. Yeah, it makes a big difference in the design of a pilot when you're considering it. So always look at that.
As we get closer to the end here, I want to end on a positive note. So I actually prepped like 2 videos that I feel are like kind of level setting and I think inspirational in regards to hopefully helping people, who are maybe feeling kind of down and out right now. And I know this is also has meaning for Conrad as well. So this is what Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot kind of talks. This is a short 5-minute thing.
You know things are going bad when you pull out the pale blue dots.
Pale Blue Dot. Just I want to remind everybody.
Okay, all right. Well, let's look at this again. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So here's Carl Sagan.
From this distant vantage point, the Earth might not seem of any particular interest. But for us, it's different. Consider again that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe, are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Do you
Love
think
that
Trump
one.
has ever watched that?
Maybe.
Maybe. He
I don't
definitely
know.
forgot it. It
I don't
didn't
think he
stick
knows who
with him.
Carl Sagan is.
Yeah.
I don't really care. But yeah, for those who don't know why Scott said that has meaning to me is that my partner, my wife, and also business partner Dea, who's directing Bootstraps, her film company is Pale Blue Dot Media, based on that quote. And it's funny, we realized at some point people were getting confused. It was like they were typing Pale Blue Dot Media rather than write out the words. So now I think both of however you try to write it, it'll get you to the site.
Yeah, for me, I just wanted to like remind people, it's a good message to remember right now. Like one of the phrases I like from that is momentary masters, where this planet is full of this little dot is full of just momentary masters, and that's all they are. They just exist for moments in time, and we move on from that. So however much bad things happen, bad things have always happened throughout humanity. They'll continue happening. And just to keep in mind that however much that moment is, it is a moment. And also to remind people that, we're all us. We get caught up in us versus them. And, that's what helps. It's what fuels Trump is this, immigrants are them. And, it's all about them. And us is just like even a small portion of America. It used to be, we're all Americans and America is amazing. And then like them is the rest of the world. And Trump has managed to like split America in two, where us is just like half of America and the other half is the enemy. And then people from other countries are the enemy. But I think it's really important for us to step back and realize that us is all of us. Like we're all on planet Earth. That's like the real true us. And I think that I hope that people can start to think more in regards to that. That we have far more, we share far more in common as humans. And just imagine what else is out there. Whatever else is out there, they are far different than us. And hopefully that can help us treat each other better.
It's just such a humbling perspective too, and that's what I want to see in our politics, is a perspective that leads with humility, implies oneness and universalism, like by its very nature, this idea that we're all sort of in this together. And that's a more inspiring politics that I think, or I hope, wins the day.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
it comes to like just the universal part of universal politics or universal basic income, like the word universal brings that picture to mind for me. Like that's
Yeah.
what I'm picturing when I hear universal, like everybody. And
Yeah.
if you want to include aliens in that, that's fine too. Like,
Someday.
I hope they
At
have
some
income as
point,
well. Like,
we can have like
I want
galactic
them to
basic
thrive.
income.
That's
Right.
pretty far
I'll be
down
okay.
the Galactic Federation of Commingle is
Right.
pretty far down the vision board, but it's there.
It is there though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And something to aim for.
That video reminded me of actually what Josh shared, the onion one from before. That's a fun one
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
perspective.
The zoom out.
Is that your second video that you were going to share, or is there a different one?
No, I was actually just going to end it now.
Yeah,
'cause
that's a
I
good place
just
to
feel
end.
it's
I
a
like
good
that.
it's a good place to end
I
it.
feel warm.
Yeah. Just,
All right.
we're all in this together, everybody, and, try to stay strong. Try to stay strong, try to think about the light in the darkness. I liked how Kamala mentioned, you can only you see the stars when it's at its darkest. That made me think of just going out in the woods, and it's amazing how you can see the galaxy. Like you can see the Milky Way, but you can only see it when you're out in the middle of nowhere and it's as dark as it can be. So hopefully out of this darkness that we're about to experience, most likely, I think, I hope I'm wrong, but hopefully we can think about how much better things can be. And hopefully we can come out of that really striving for those things instead of just striving for maintaining a status quo and preventing things from getting worse. We really need to start hoping and having a vision. And I hope that's the result of this.
Right. And I would say to the extent people who are looking for something to do can find ways to connect with others, find ways to build a forward-looking and thinking way forward. Yeah, just find the people and be in service of others to the extent that you can. I think that's the only way we dig out of this.
Yeah, connect with others. It's always the best thing. If you're feeling isolated, so much of this anger and frustration is just this result of this isolation and this anger fuel that we're being fed from social media. So definitely consider just stepping back and being a part of the human experience more, trying to cut down your social media usage, and just spending time with friends and family and your community.
I think I would feel the same way, maybe to a less poignant degree, if the outcome of the election had been the other way. But it's it's pretty stark for a lot of people right now. Yeah, so find those people.
All right, everybody.
All right. We'll keep
Thanks
talking.
for listening to our 2 cents about what just occurred and what could happen. I hope maybe people are feeling a little bit better after having listened to this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe and share with the rest of your networks. Encourage others to watch this too. We'll catch you later.